Kayla set the shiny new brass key on the kitchen island, looked the woman who'd raised her husband dead in the eye, and said, "This isn't your home anymore, Yvonne, so start packing." What Kayla didn't know, standing there with her chin up and her phone in her hand, was that she had just slid a key across the counter to the only person in White County whose name had ever touched the deed of that house. Not Kayla's name, not Derek's. One name, recorded down at the courthouse on the square, plain as a headstone, and in a few months, in a quiet office 2 hours up the road in Knoxville, that one fact would walk into a room full of strangers and take back everything Kayla thought she had already won. She had time to learn all that. Right now, there was only the key on the granite, the peach cobbler cooling on the stove, and a little brass shine catching the kitchen light. Yvonne Greer had been standing at that counter when Kayla came in. Her accordion folder lay open in front of her, the soft brown one with a date penciled on every tab. October's property tax receipt was still between two fingers. $1,140, paid at the courthouse window on the 2nd of the month, the way she had paid it every October for 31 years. She didn't set it down. She finished. She slid the receipt into its slot, behind September, ahead of November, and pressed the flap flat with her thumb. 30 years of charting patience had taught her hands what to do when the rest of her wanted to shake. Then she looked up. "Say that again," Yvonne said. "Not loud, just clear. You heard me." Kayla crossed her arms over her good coat. "Derek and I talked it through. We need the room. You've had 31 years in this house. It's somebody else's turn." By the refrigerator stood Derek, 34 years old, hands jammed in his pockets, staring at the linoleum like it might crack open and let him drop through. "Derek," Yvonne said. "Mom, that was the whole of it." Nobody said another word for a moment. The cobbler ticked as it cooled. Out on Beechwood Lane, a screen door banged and a dog barked twice and went still. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary street that had no notion anything had just broken in the little white house at the end of it. Yvonne closed the folder. She wound the cord around the button, slow, the way she had tied off 1,000 small things across 30 years of night shifts. "I'm not going to argue with you," she said. "I don't get loud. I get accurate." She took her keys from the dish by the door. On the ring, beside the worn gold wedding band she wore on a chain now because her knuckles had swelled past it, hung a small flat key the color of an old penny. Kayla had asked about that key twice. Yvonne had never once told her what it opened. To understand that key, and the brown folder, and why a soft-spoken woman would file a tax receipt instead of throw a punch, you have to go back. Not far. 3 years. The house at the end of Beechwood Lane, on a quiet street in Sparta, Tennessee, was the kind of place where everybody waved and nobody locked the screen door. White clapboard, green shutters, a wrap-around porch that Walter Greer had rebuilt board by board the summer Derek turned 10. 31 years Yvonne had lived under that roof. She had carried groceries up those steps in every kind of weather, carried a newborn through that front door, and one gray morning she had watched two men carry her husband out of it for the last time. Walter had been gone 4 years now. The hydrangeas along the porch rail were hers. She had put them in the spring the doctors first said the word nobody in that house wanted to say. Knelt in the dirt with her good knees already going because a body needs something to do with its hands while it waits. They came back blue every June. They were blooming the morning Kayla told her to pack. For most of those 31 years, Yvonne worked nights at the county hospital, 20 miles of dark road each way. Charge nurse, the last 15 of them. She was the one they sent in to sit with the families on the worst nights, because Yvonne Greer did not flinch, did not lie, and did not raise her voice. She charted everything: times, doses, names, the small true facts that hold up later when somebody wants to argue. A young nurse asked her once how she stayed so calm with a doctor shouting 2 feet from her face. Yvonne capped her pen and said, "I don't get loud, baby. I get accurate." The girl wrote it on a sticky note and kept it on her locker for years. Derek had married Kayla 3 years back, in the church on Maple, with a cobbler reception in the fellowship hall. They moved into the house 2 months later. Just for a while, they said. Just till Kayla's online boutique took off. Yvonne made up the back bedroom and was glad of the noise. The place had gone quiet since Walter. It did not stay her house for long. Not in the way that counts. First, it was small. Kayla rearranged the kitchen until Yvonne couldn't find her own pans. Yvonne's recliner went out to the porch to make room for a ring light and a rolling rack of dresses that never seemed to sell. Then it was the chores. Somehow it became Yvonne who ran the wash. Yvonne who watched the pot. Yvonne who was asked, sweetly, to maybe eat a little earlier so the kitchen was free for Kayla's evening live streams. She went from widow to houseguest to something with no good name. A woman doing the whole work of a house, in a house where she was told, more and more, how lucky she was to stay in it. And always, when Yvonne asked a plain question, there came the same smooth answer. When she asked why a man was measuring the back bedroom. When she asked about the second mailbox key. When she asked once, gently, whose name the new homeowner's insurance was under, Kayla smiled and patted the air with one hand. "We'll get all that straightened out once the paperwork clears." Once the paperwork clears. Yvonne heard that phrase so many times it stopped sounding like English. She did not yet know what paperwork Kayla meant. She would find out. Here is what nobody in that house seemed to remember. Every October, while the boutique bled money and Derek worked doubles at the parts plant over in Cookville, and Kayla bought herself a new ring light, it was Yvonne who drove to the courthouse on the square and paid the property tax. In cash, at the window, with a slip she carried home and filed by date. $1,140 this year, a little less the year before. She had the receipt for every one of them, going back further than Kayla had been alive. And in the hall closet, behind the winter coats and a box of Walter's tools she could never bring herself to give away, sat an old brown safe about the size of a footstool. Yvonne had not opened it in front of another living soul in 4 years. The little penny-colored key on her chain was the one that fit it. What was inside was between her and Walter. She kept meaning to deal with it. She kept not being ready. It was the second week of June when the gray sedan started showing up. Yvonne noticed it from the porch, the way she noticed everything. Quietly, while shelling peas or watering the blue hydrangeas. A gray 4-door, nobody she knew, parked across the lane 2 and 3 days running. Once a man climbed out with a clipboard and walked the property line along the side yard, counting his steps, looking up at the roof, writing things down. When she came to the rail, he gave her a nod and a small wave, got back in his car, and drove off toward Maple. She asked Kayla about him that night. "Just somebody lost," Kayla said, not lifting her eyes from her phone. "Probably turning around. People don't take notes on your gutters when they're turning around." Yvonne let it go. She filed it away the way she filed everything, in the part of her mind that kept time and kept score and waited. She did not have to wait long. It came to a head on a Tuesday. The same Tuesday the cobbler was cooling and the brass key hit the granite. After Yvonne said her piece about not getting loud, she walked down the hall to begin, because she was not going to stand in her own kitchen and beg. She found her bedroom door already open and her good suitcase already on the bed, half full. Derek was folding her sweaters into it, badly, the way he had folded since he was a boy. Derek. She stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" Mom, please don't make it harder. He wouldn't turn around. Kayla had the locks done this morning. While you were at the store. It's done, all right? It's just easier if you go tonight. I got you a room over on Maple. Just a few days, till everybody cools off. She went to the front door and tried her own key, the brass house key she'd carried for 31 years. It turned a quarter inch and stopped against a lock that did not know her anymore. Fresh, bright scratches ringed a new deadbolt, drilled out and swapped that morning, while she stood in the canned goods aisle at the market deciding between 2 cans of green beans. Yvonne did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She went back to the bedroom, set Derek's bad folding to rights out of pure habit, and packed her own bag the way she packed for everything, neat and complete. 2 changes of clothes, her good shoes, her pill organizer, the brown accordion folder, and around her neck, under her blouse where it had ridden for 4 years, the chain with Walter's wedding band and the little penny-colored key. At the door, she stopped and looked at her son. You know I paid the taxes on this house last week, she said, quietly. A fact, set down between them like the receipt on the counter. Derek's jaw worked. Kayla says that's all getting handled. I'm sure she does. Yvonne picked up her bag. Lock up behind me. Oh, I forgot. You already did. Out at the curb, Lorraine Pike from 2 doors down was bringing in her trash cans, and she lifted a hand and started to call something neighborly across the lane, then saw the suitcase and let her hand come down slow. Yvonne gave her a small nod that said, "Not now," and Lorraine, who had buried a husband too, gave one back that said, "I'm here when you're ready." The motel on Maple Street had 8 rooms, a flickering sign, and a window unit that rattled like a man clearing his throat. Yvonne paid for a week. She set her bag on the chair, smoothed the thin bedspread flat with both hands, and laid the brown folder open in the middle of the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress in the lamplight, an evicted woman in a rented room 2 miles from a house that still, on paper, answered to no one but her. She reached into the folder, drew out a clean legal pad, and uncapped her pen. In the small, even hand she had charted 30 years of patience with, she began to write down dates, because Kayla had made one quiet mistake that nobody in that kitchen had caught. She had told a woman who writes everything down to start packing. And Yvonne Greer intended to write down every last bit of it. The window unit rattled and caught and rattled again, and Yvonne let it. She had worked enough night shifts to write through worse noise than a dying air conditioner. She did not write fast. She wrote the way she had charted, one true line at a time, leaving room in the margin for what she did not yet know. October the 2nd, this year, $1,140, cash, courthouse window. She wrote the date and the number, and underneath it the date the year before, and the year before that, going back, each one a receipt she could put her hand on. 3 years of taxes since Derek and Kayla had moved in. 3 years Kayla had called the house theirs at the dinner table, and never once carried a dime of it down to the courthouse on the square. Then she started a second column. The repairs, the roof, 2 autumns back, when the storm peeled shingles off the back slope, and Yvonne wrote the check to the man from Cookville who climbed up in the cold. The water heater, the new pump for the well, the tree fellow who took down the dead oak before it could come through the kitchen. Every one of them invoiced to Yvonne Greer, paid by Yvonne Greer, filed by date in the soft brown folder that now lay open on a motel bedspread the color of weak coffee. By the time the sign outside stopped buzzing and the lot went quiet, she had 2 pages. Dates down the left, the way the good nurses do it, so that anybody reading later could follow the whole night without having to ask a single question. She capped the pen and looked at the 2 pages a long while. Her phone sat dark on the nightstand. Derek had not called. She had half thought he might. Once Kayla was asleep, once it was just him and his conscience and the dark. He had not. She set that down too, in the part of her that kept score, and she was surprised at how it didn't break her. She had sat at the bedsides of mothers who lost more than a roof and held their hands while they did it. She knew the difference between a wound that ends you and a wound you walk out of. This was the second kind. She meant to walk. She thought, lying there, about the women who had raised her own mother, gone now, who worked white folks' kitchens by day and came home and kept a household ledger in a school composition book. A penny accounted for on every line, because a black woman in that county learned early that her word would be doubted and her paper would not. The ladies of the usher board at the church on Spring Street, who taught a young Yvonne that you kept your receipt and you kept your dignity, and you let the Lord and the records keep the rest. She had been keeping receipts her whole life. She had not known until this week that she had been keeping them for this. Somewhere past the wall, a truck pulled in, idled, cut off. Yvonne closed her eyes and did not sleep much, and the part of her that kept time kept right on keeping it. In the morning, she was up before the diner on Maple opened. She washed her face, pinned her hair, put on the good blouse, and drove the 2 miles back into the middle of Sparta, with the folder on the passenger seat where a person might set a pocketbook or a hand. The county courthouse sat in the middle of the square the way it had her whole life, red brick gone soft at the corners, a clock that had been 4 minutes slow since Walter was alive. Yvonne had paid her taxes in that building every October for 31 years. She had gotten her marriage license in that building. She knew which door stuck and which stair to take slow. The Register of Deeds kept an office on the first floor, down a hall that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Behind the counter sat a woman about Derek's age with reading glasses pushed up in her hair. "Help you? I'd like to look at the record on a property," Yvonne said. "My property. I want to see what's filed on it." "Address?" Yvonne gave it. The house at the end of Beechwood Lane. The woman, whose nameplate said Donna, typed it in with 2 fingers and waited, and the old computer thought about it, and then the record came up. "Here it is." Donna turned the screen part way. "Greer, you said you're the owner?" "I am. Then this is you." Donna read it off, plain as weather. Greer, comma, Yvonne, sole owner. The transfer's dated 31 years back. And then there's a second instrument filed. Oh, going on 4 years now. Quitclaim. Walter Greer to Yvonne Greer. She looked up over the reading glasses she hadn't pulled down. That'd be a husband putting it all in the wife's name. Common enough when somebody's getting their affairs in order. Getting their affairs in order. Yvonne held the edge of the counter. "You're telling me my name is the only one on it, only one I see, no co-owner, free and clear of a mortgage too. Looks like the old note got paid off years back." Donna scrolled. "I got nobody on here but you, Mrs. Greer, 4 years. The year the cancer came." Walter, who never said 2 words about money if he could help it, who Yvonne had to fuss at just to go to the doctor, had walked into this same building while she was working nights and quietly signed the whole thing over to her, and never told her, and let her go right on thinking it was theirs together, the way it had always been theirs together. She had to take a breath before she trusted her voice. "Thank you. Can I get a certified copy of that filed? Gonna cost you a few dollars?" "That's all right." Donna started clicking to send it to the printer in the back, and then she stopped, and her face changed a little, the way a face changes when it remembers something it isn't sure it should mention. "Funny," she said. "What's that?" "This is the second time this property's come across my desk in a month." Donna tapped the screen. "Had a title company out of Knoxville pull the whole file, back at the start of June. faxed me the request and everything. Said they were running a search for a closing. She frowned. I figured you knew. People usually know when their own house is closing. The floor did not move. Yvonne had stood at too many bedsides to let a room see what was happening in her chest. But everything that had been loose in her mind for 3 weeks slid, all at once, into a single hard line, the way scattered facts will when you finally find the date that orders them. A closing, a title company in Knoxville, a search on her house, the gray sedan. She saw it again, parked across the lane 2 and 3 mornings running, and the man with the clipboard walking her side yard heel to toe, counting his steps off the property line, tipping his head back to look at the roof Yvonne had paid to fix. She had asked Kayla, and Kayla had said somebody lost, somebody turning around. A man does not measure a house he is turning around in. A man measures a house when somebody is fixing to put a price on it. He had not been lost. He had been an appraiser. Somebody had sent him to put a number on Yvonne's roof and Yvonne's well pump and Yvonne's blue hydrangeas so the house could be sold. And Yvonne had stood on her own porch and watered her flowers while he did it. That was why the locks could not wait. That was why the suitcase was already half packed before she got home from the market. Why it had to be that Tuesday. Why it had to be done quiet and quick. It had never been about Kayla needing the room. You do not change the locks at 9 in the morning over a spare bedroom. You change the locks because there is a date on a calendar you cannot move, and a woman in the house who pays the taxes and keeps the receipts. And you need her gone and confused and 2 miles away in a motel before anybody official comes to the door. Mrs. Greer? Donna had the certified copy in her hand now. You all right, hun? I'm fine, Yvonne said, and she was, in the way that mattered. I'm a good deal better than I was a minute ago, as a matter of fact. She took the copy. She thanked Donna by name. She walked back down the waxed hall and out the door that stuck, and stood at the top of the courthouse steps in the June sun, and she did not feel like a woman who had been put out of her house. She felt like a charge nurse who had finally found where the bleeding was coming from. She did not drive back to the motel. She drove to the little post office annex over on Liberty Street because 3 weeks back, the morning after she packed her bag, she had done one small, ordinary thing that Kayla had not thought to stop. She had filled out a yellow card and forwarded her mail. Not the household mail. Her mail. The things that came addressed to Yvonne Greer and to Yvonne Greer alone. The way the courthouse had it. The way the bank had always had it. There was a little stack waiting in the box. A church bulletin from the ladies on Spring Street, a statement from the pharmacy, a grocery flyer, and one business envelope, heavy stock, a bank's name in the corner she did not recognize, addressed to Yvonne Greer at the house on Beechwood Lane, and forwarded on in the post office's purple ink. She opened it standing right there in the annex with her reading glasses on. It was a notice. The kind a lender is required to send. It thanked Yvonne Greer for her recent home equity line of credit, secured by the property at the end of Beechwood Lane, and it set out, in the small gray print they use for the things they hope you will not read, the amount that had been drawn against her house. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that buys a year of ring lights and rolling racks and live streams that do not sell, and pays down the older debts hiding behind them, and still leaves a person needing to sell the whole house, quick, to get out from under it. Yvonne had never sat at any bank. Yvonne had never signed any line. The paper said she had been somewhere putting her name to a loan on a night she had been at home, in the house that was hers, watering the flowers, watching the pot, running the wash, being told how lucky she was to stay. She stood in the post office annex on Liberty Street and read it twice, the way she read everything twice. Then she folded it along its crease and slid it into the brown folder. in front of the certified deed, behind the last of the tax receipts, where it belonged, in order, by date. She was not angry, or she was, but anger was a loud thing, and Yvonne had no use for loud. What she felt, standing there with 30 years of careful paper in her hands, and a husband 4 years gone who had seen this coming better than she had, was something steadier than anger. She felt the whole shape of it now, clean and certain. She knew what the gray sedan was. She knew what once the paperwork clears had always meant. She knew there was a closing coming, a date already on somebody's calendar up in Knoxville, a table where Kayla meant to sit down in front of a buyer and a lender and sign away a house that had never, on a single page in that courthouse, belonged to her. And Yvonne knew one more thing, the thing that changed how she would carry all the rest of it. There was a deed in her name, certified, fresh in her hand. But there was an older one, the original, the one Walter had signed in his own slow, careful hand the year he got sick, and she knew exactly where it was. It was in the brown safe in the hall closet, behind the winter coats and the box of his tools, under a lid she had not lifted in front of another living soul in 4 years. The little penny-colored key for it was around her neck this minute, riding on the same chain as his wedding band, the way it had ridden every day since she lost him. She had been driving past her own answer every time she drove past that house. Yvonne folded her glasses into their case. She got in the car. She did not go to a lawyer, though she could have, and a lawyer would have been glad to make a long, loud, expensive war of it. She had buried the only person she ever wanted to stand and fight beside. This did not call for a war. It called for the truth, set down on a table in front of the people who needed to see it, in the right order, at the right time. First, though, it called for her to go home and reach past Walter's coats and finally open that safe. The house at the end of Beechwood Lane sat in the noon light just the way it always had. White clapboard gone a little chalky on the south side, the wraparound porch she had swept 10,000 mornings, the hydrangeas she had set in the ground the spring Walter got his diagnosis now grown waist-high and heavy with blue. Somebody had let them go dry. She noticed that before she noticed anything else, the way a nurse notices the small wrong thing first. The blooms on the west end had browned at the edges for want of water, 3 weeks of June sun and not one pass of the hose. The place was already forgetting how to be tended. Derek's truck was in the drive. Kayla's car was not. Yvonne parked at the curb where she had parked 1,000 times, took the brown folder off the passenger seat, and walked up the path past her thirsty flowers to her own front door. The lock was the wrong color, bright, unweathered brass where the old worn knob had been, the drill marks still scuffed pale in the wood around it. She stood and looked at that shiny new thing a moment. Then she did not try her old key because her old key would not turn, and she had not driven out here to stand on a porch rattling a knob like a stranger. She knocked. Footsteps inside, slow. The door opened the width of the chain, and then the chain came off, and there was Derek, her boy, 34 years old and looking every minute of it, in a t-shirt at noon on a Tuesday, with the unshaved, hollowed-out look of a man who was not sleeping well either. "Mama." It came out of him soft and startled, like he had half forgotten she was a person who could simply appear. "Derek." She kept her voice level, the bedside voice. "I've come to get a few of my things. That's all. You can stand right there and watch me do it." His jaw worked. For a second she thought he might say the line Kayla would have said, the one about the locks and the paperwork. But he was not Kayla. He stepped back and held the door and looked at the floorboards he had looked at the whole time 3 weeks back, while his wife told his mother to start packing. The house she walked into was not her house anymore in any way, but the one that counted. The front room where she had rocked Derek as a baby was a warehouse now. Two collapsible clothing racks stood by the window crammed with plastic-wrapped dresses, tags still on, the cheap kind that come folded flat from overseas. A ring light on a tall stand leaned in the corner. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the wall under the mantel, some sealed, some gaping, and the labels on them were shipping labels, returns going back the other way. Yvonne understood a great deal, standing in her own front room, that no spoken word had told her. A business that was selling did not have its whole inventory boxed up to send back. A business that was selling did not need a house. "Where's Kayla?" she said. Not a question, really. "Knoxville." Derek rubbed the back of his neck. She had meetings. People about the business. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been told and has not let himself look at too closely. All right. Yvonne moved through to the hall, past the bathroom, to the closet at the end where the family's coats had hung for 31 years. She opened it. Walter's coats were still in there, shoved to the left end of the rod. His good gray wool and the canvas barn coat with the torn pocket she had meant to mend and never had. Derek had not been able to take them down. Some mercy in the boy yet. Below them on the floor sat the box of Walter's tools, and behind the box, where it had sat in the dark for 4 years under a lid she had not lifted in front of another living soul, sat the old brown safe. "I'll just be a minute," she said over her shoulder. "Go on, son, let me do this part by myself." He hesitated, then went, and she heard him stop down the hall, out of sight, where a boy stands when he wants to be near his mother and cannot make himself be in the room with what he is allowed. Yvonne knelt down on the hall floor. Her knees were 61 years old and they told her so. She reached up under her collar and drew out the chain she wore every day of her life, and on it, warm from her skin, rode 2 things: Walter's plain gold wedding band and a little key the color of an old penny. She fit the key to the safe. It turned the way it always had, with that small, reluctant give, and the door swung open on its stiff hinge. Everything inside was in order, because she was a woman who kept things in order, and because the man who had filled it had been the same kind of careful in his quiet way. The insurance papers, the title to the truck, a ribbon-tied stack of letters he had written her the 2 years he drove a route through Memphis before they married. And underneath, flat against the bottom, in a stiff manila sleeve, the deed. The original. She drew it out and turned it to the hall light, and there it was. The raised seal of White County pressed into the paper. The recording stamp, the date 4 years gone, and the name on the line where the owner goes. Greer, Yvonne. Hers and no one else's. Walter had walked into that courthouse the year the cancer came, while she worked her nights and signed away his own half of the only thing he owned so that it would all be hers, and he had never said a word. And tucked against the deed, folded twice, was a single sheet of his lined notebook paper with her name on the outside in his slow, careful hand. Not Yvonne. Vonnie, the way only he had ever called her. She sat down all the way on the floor then, her back against the doorframe, and she unfolded it. The handwriting wandered, the way his had near the end, but every word stood up off the page in his voice, so plain and so much him that she could hear the porch swing and the cicadas behind it. Vonnie, if you are reading this, then I have gone on ahead, and I am sorry for it. You know, I never could stand to leave a job half done, and this is the worst one. I did a thing and did not tell you, because you would have argued and you would have won. You always do. I put the house in your name, all of it, free and clear. I paid the last of the note off in the spring. I want you to hear me on this. This is your ground to stand on, Vani. No one gets to move you off it. Not the bank, not the years, not anybody who ever comes around with a sweet word and a hard plan. You stood by me 30 years and held this family up on your own two shoulders, and I never once told you enough what that was worth. So this is me telling you, stand right where you are. The ground is yours. I love you more than the words will hold. Walter. Yvonne Greer did not cry. She had not cried at his bedside, where she had to be steady for him, and she had not cried at the grave, where she had to be steady for Derek, and she did not cry now on the floor of the hall closet with his coat sleeve brushing the top of her head. But she sat there a long while with the letter in both hands, and something that had been wound up tight in her chest for 3 weeks, for 4 years, eased open just enough to let her breathe all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. He had seen it coming. Not Kayla, not the lock, not any of the particulars. But he had known, the way an old husband knows, that the world would one day come around to his wife with a sweet word and a hard plan, and he had set down a stone under her feet so that when it came, she would have somewhere to stand. She had been carrying the key to it around her neck this whole time, next to his ring, and she had not known what it would turn out to be for. "I hear you," she said, low, to the coats and the quiet. "I'm standing." She folded the letter back along its creases and slid it into the brown folder with the certified copy and the tax receipts and the HELOC notice. All of it together now, the whole true story in order by date. Then she did not put the deed back in the safe. She left the deed exactly where it was, in the safe, and she closed the safe's door, and she turned the penny-colored key, and she lifted the whole thing up off the closet floor into her arms. It was heavier than it looked. She carried it that way, against her chest like a thing that needed holding, back down the hall to where her son was standing. Derek looked at the box in her arms and did not ask what it was. "Mama, you don't have to carry that. Let me. You can carry it to the car." She let him take it. "It's only papers." At the car, he set it in the trunk where she pointed, and then he stood there with the trunk open, working up to something, and at last it came out of him in a rush, the way the worst things do. "Mama, Kayla wanted me to tell you. There's papers to sign. Thursday, up in Knoxville, at an office. She said it's getting everything sorted, the business loan and all, and your name's on some of the old documents from when, you know, from before. So they need you to come sign off." He could not look at her. "She said there'd be a little money in it for your trouble, to help you get set up someplace nice." He swallowed. "She said once the paperwork clears, it'll all be square and you won't have to worry about any of it. Once the paperwork clears." There it was again, the phrase Kayla had laid down on the kitchen island 3 weeks back like a card she thought nobody would turn over. Once the paperwork clears. Yvonne had finally learned what was under it. A buyer at a table, a lender with a check, a title company out of Knoxville, and a 61-year-old woman invited to come and put her own hand to the sale of the house her husband had died making sure was hers, and be paid a little something for the trouble of being robbed. She looked at her son, who believed it was a business loan, who had been told a smaller, softer version of it, because a man who knows the whole thing cannot keep studying the floor, he has to choose. Kayla had kept Derek half in the dark on purpose, the same as she had kept Yvonne all the way in it. That told Yvonne something too, and she filed it where she filed everything. "What time Thursday?" Yvonne said. Derek blinked, like he had braced for a fight and the floor had moved under him. 10 o'clock. She said 10. "You'll come?" "I'll come." She reached up and patted his cheek, the rough, unshaved cheek of her grown boy. the way she had when he was small and feverish. Tell her I'll be there at 10. Tell her I'll sign whatever needs signing. That last part was even true, in its way, though not in the way Kayla would hear it. Go on in now. Water those flowers before they die. The blue ones don't forgive you twice. She drove back to the motel on Maple with the brown safe riding in the trunk and the brown folder on the seat beside her. And that night, she did not write any new dates because there were no new dates to learn. She knew the whole of it now. She read Walter's letter once more by the lamp, and then she lay still in the dark with the window unit rattling, not grieving and not raging, only waiting, the way she had waited out 100 long nights on the ward, watching a thing run its course toward the hour when somebody competent would finally have to do something true. I don't get loud, she thought, the way she had thought it standing in her own kitchen with a tax receipt in her hand. I get accurate. And she had never in her life been more accurate than she was about to be. Thursday came up hot and bright. She put on the navy dress she wore to funerals and to deacons' meetings, the one that said she was a woman to be taken seriously, and she pinned her hair, and she fixed Walter's ring and the little key under her collar where they always rode. She loaded the brown safe into the trunk herself this time, and she drove east out of Sparta on the interstate with the morning sun coming straight through the windshield, 40-some miles down into Knoxville, off the exit and through the downtown streets to a glass-fronted building where a title company kept its offices on the 3rd floor. The conference room had a long table and a window full of city. They were already there when the receptionist showed her in, a man and woman she did not know, the buyers, polite and a little nervous in their good clothes. A loan officer with a laptop. Derek along the near wall, not sitting, hands jammed in his pockets. And at the head of the table, risen halfway out of her chair with a bright, welcoming smile arranged on her face, in a blazer Yvonne had watched come out of one of those plastic wrappers, Kayla. Behind a stack of neat folders at the far end sat a heavy-set man in shirt sleeves with reading glasses and a courteous, careful manner, the title officer, who stood as Yvonne entered and said, "Mrs. Greer, I'm Raymond Tate. We spoke to your daughter-in-law. Come on in and have a seat. We'll get you all squared away this morning." Yvonne Greer came in. She set the brown folder on the table in front of an empty chair, and she did not yet sit down. Kayla recovered first. She always did. The smile came back up onto her face a half-second before it reached her eyes, and she rose the rest of the way out of her chair with both hands open and warm, hostessing. "Yvonne, I'm so glad you made it all this way. Sit down, honey. We saved you the good seat." She nodded at the empty chair with the folder in front of it, the chair drawn up closest to the buyers, the chair where a person sits to put her name to a thing. "These good people gave up their whole morning for us. Let's not have them waiting on us." Yvonne rested one hand on the back of the offered chair and did not lower herself into it. She looked around the long table the way she used to look across a ward at the top of a shift, taking her count, marking who sat where and who was already in trouble and did not know it yet. The two buyers, young and scrubbed, holding hands under the lip of the table like people about to be photographed. The lender's man with his laptop and his neat squared stacks. Raymond Tate at the foot, glasses pushed up into his gray hair, the county file lined up in front of him. Derek against the wall, finding a spot on the carpet to study. And Kayla at the head of it all, bright as the new brass on the door back home. "Go on," Yvonne said mildly. "Don't hold things up on my account. I'd like to hear how it all works." That was all the runway Kayla needed. She turned to the buyers and put a small catch into her voice. "This is an emotional day for our family. I won't pretend it isn't. This is the house my husband grew up in. Derek and I poured our hearts into that place. Every weekend, every dollar we had. The porch, the yard, those flowers out front I babied along. She touched her own chest with 2 fingers. But the boutique took off faster than we ever dreamed, and you reach a point where you have to free up the equity and bet on yourself. So we're letting our home go to people who'll love it the way we loved it. The young woman made a soft, sympathetic sound. It means the world, Kayla said, knowing it's the right family. Yvonne stood quiet and listened to her son's wife call it her heart and her home and her equity. 3 untruths stacked so smooth a body could have skated across them, and she did not say one word. She had charted enough long nights to know you let the fever finish climbing before you read the number off the glass. Raymond Tate cleared his throat and began to walk the table through the file, polite and unhurried. A man who had closed 1,000 of these and meant to close this one the same. The purchase price. The buyer's financing, approved. The existing lien to be satisfied at closing, a home equity line, he said, opened against the property a little over a year ago, to be paid off out of the seller's proceeds before anything else funded. He turned a page with one dry finger. Appraisal came back clean. No access issues. Fellow walked the lot and the interior back in the spring. No trouble at all. And there it was. The gray sedan that had idled at the curb on Beechwood Lane 3 separate mornings while Yvonne was still being moved around her own kitchen like a visitor. The man with the clipboard she had watched from the window, pacing the side yard, crouching by her hydrangeas, writing numbers on a board. Not a county man. Not a neighbor come to say a kind thing. An appraiser, putting a price on a house so it could be sold out from under the woman sleeping inside it before she ever learned it was for sale. The whole machine of it stood up clean and complete in her mind. Every part dropped into its slot. The drilled locks, the bag packed for her, the room on Maple with the rattling window unit. None of it had ever been about Kayla wanting a place to raise a family. It had been about getting an old woman off the ground before the paper caught up to the lie. So, Kayla said, sliding a single sheet down the table toward the empty chair, her nails bright against the white of it. All we need from you, Yvonne, is right here. Your name's on some of the older county paperwork from way back. So the title folks just want you to sign off that you don't have any claim, and then we're square, and you'll walk out with a little something to get yourself settled somewhere nice. It's purely a formality. The smile again. Then this is all behind us. Every bit of it. The sheet came to rest beside Yvonne's hand. A consent. A release. The kind of paper that asks a person to sign away the very ground under her feet and calls it a courtesy. Yvonne looked down at it. She did not pick up the pen. "I'll sign what's true," she said. "Let me fetch the rest of my papers." I left them by the door. She turned and crossed the carpet to the low credenza beside the door, where she had set the brown safe when she came in, the safe her boy had carried out to her trunk 3 days back, believing it held nothing but old papers. Behind her, the room shifted. She heard Kayla say something light and quick. "Oh, we won't need all that. We've got everything right here." But Yvonne was already kneeling, already drawing the chain up out of her collar where Walter's plain gold band rode it, and the little penny-colored key rode beside it. She fit the key to the lock. It turned with that same stiff, faithful give it had given her on the closet floor at home. She lifted out the stiff manila sleeve and the folded sheet of lined paper tucked flat against it, and she carried both back to the table and did not sit even then. She slid the manila sleeve down the length of the table, past the buyers, past the lender's man and his stacks, all the way to the foot, to Raymond Tate. "Mr. Tate, you said when I came in you'd get us all squared away this morning." Her voice never lifted. "I'd take it as a kindness if you'd read out the name on the owner's line." The one your own county set down. Read it out loud, so every soul at this table hears it the same." Raymond Tate slid his glasses down off his forehead. He drew the document out of the sleeve, and the raised seal of White County caught the light off the window, and Yvonne watched a small, careful frown gather between his brows as he read it once to himself, the way a careful man reads a thing before he says it aloud. Then he set it flat on the table, turned to his laptop, and typed, and the room had gone so still you could hear the keys go down one at a time. He was pulling the live record, the County Register of Deeds, the public index that does not perform and does not grieve and does not care one bit whose mourning it spoils. "This is the recorded warranty deed for the property on Beechwood Lane," Tate said, and his voice had changed. It had the flat, even weight of a man reading off a chart at the foot of a bed. "Recorded 4 years ago this past spring. Grantor, Walter Greer, grantee and sole owner of record." He looked up one time, found Kayla's face, and then went back down to the page because a professional finishes his sentence. "Yvonne Greer, 100%, in her name alone, and there is no transfer recorded against this parcel since that day. No sale, no quitclaim, no second name added, nothing." He let it sit a moment in the quiet. "The title to this house is held by Mrs. Yvonne Greer," he said, "and by no one else. It has been the entire time." For a long moment, nobody at the table moved. The young woman buyer looked sideways at her husband. The lender's man had stopped with his hand flat on his neat stack of papers, and Yvonne watched him do the arithmetic that men in his chair are paid to do fast. The home equity line opened a year ago against this house, signed by a woman whose name appeared nowhere on its title. The loan he had driven here to pay off and roll into a sale of property his borrower had never owned a square foot of. He closed his laptop, slow, the way a man closes a door on a room he does not want to be caught standing in. "Mrs. Greer," he said, and he said it to Kayla now, and every drop of the warmth had gone out of it. "The line of credit on this property. Whose name is on that note?" Kayla's smile had not entirely come down. It hung there on her face, stranded, with nothing left underneath it. "It's our home. It's a family thing. The names are just, it's complicated. The equity was always meant to." "It isn't complicated," Tate said. "Quiet. It's recorded." The lender's man rose. He gathered his stacks into one squared pile and clicked his pen shut against his thumb. He told the table, in the careful, flat voice of a man already rehearsing the call he would make from the parking garage, that his institution would not be funding anything this morning, that the line opened against this property would be referred to the bank's fraud review the moment he reached his desk, that until the matter was sorted, there would be a hold against the property, and the title company would flag the file accordingly, and Tate was already nodding, already drawing a slow red line through the top sheet of his folder. The young couple who had given up their mourning would keep every dollar they had carried in to buy a house from a woman who had never owned it, and they would drive home still able to go and buy a true one from somebody whose name was actually on the door. Whatever Kayla had meant, all those weeks, by the morning the paperwork would finally come clear, this was not the version she had pictured. The paper had come clear, all right. It had cleared her clean off the deed she had borrowed a small fortune against, and it had done it without Yvonne lifting her voice a single notch above the hum of the air handler up in the ceiling tiles. Derek came off the wall. For 3 weeks, for 3 years, the boy had found somewhere else to rest his eyes, and his mother had let him, because you cannot make a grown man look straight at a thing 1 minute before he is ready. But he crossed the room now, past his wife, and came and stood beside Yvonne at the head of the table, close. the way he used to stand against her hip in the grocery line when he was small enough to. He did not say anything clever. He put his hand on her shoulder, and his voice came out low and wrecked. Mama, I didn't know about the loan. I swear it before God. I never knew. I know you didn't, son. She reached up and laid her hand over his. She kept you in the dark, same as me, just a different shade of it. She looked down the table one last time at Kayla, who had sunk back into the head chair with both palms flat on the table in front of her, staring at the recorded deed turned the wrong way around, reading her own undoing upside down. Yvonne felt no wish to gloat. There was nothing in her chest reaching for it. She had not driven east to throw this woman out of anything at all. She had simply stopped after 3 long years of doing it, the one quiet thing that had kept the whole arrangement standing up. She had taken her shoulder out from under a roof that had never for one day been Kayla's to shelter beneath. She gathered the deed back into its sleeve and folded Walter's letter along its soft, worn creases and slid both into the brown folder with the tax receipts and the repair invoices and every October she had ever paid, all of it in order, all of it by date. She lifted the safe up off the credenza herself, heavy against her chest, and she did not let Derek take it this time, though he reached. Some things a woman carries out on her own 2 arms. She drove west out of Knoxville with the afternoon sun at her back at last instead of straight in her eyes, down off the interstate and onto the 2 lanes that ran toward home, past the county courthouse where her name sat in a bound book exactly as her husband had set it down, through Sparta, onto Beechwood Lane, where the neighbors lifted their hands at the familiar car without yet knowing there was a single thing to know. The hydrangeas at the west end of the porch had been watered. Somebody had finally dragged the hose around the side. The blue had come back up into the blooms that had been browning at their edges, deep and full again in the long gold light, and Yvonne stood a moment on her own front walk and looked at the flowers she had planted the spring. The worst news of her life came, alive and drinking and hers. She carried the safe up onto the wraparound porch as the light went down from gold into dusk over the lane. She sat in Walter's chair with the safe on her knees and the first cicadas starting up in the dark of the yard. And she drew out the deed and the letter one more time and read his slow, wandering hand until she could hear him saying every word of it. Then she folded the letter closed. She laid the deed and Walter's letter down inside the brown safe and swung the door closed. The old lock clicked shut under her thumb,